Welcome to the 19th Annual Goldstone Forum. I'm Cristina Bicchieri, the Director of PPE. And well, it's nice to see so many old and new faces here. Now, we are honored today to have Professor Deirdre McCloskey to share with us her remarks on Humane through Liberalism. Now, before her remarks, we have several people we want to thank. First and foremost, we want to thank Steve Goldstone, a dear friend of the program. He has funded PPE for many years, and he still funds the Goldstone Forum, lectures. And he sends his regret he cannot be here today. We want to thank Danielle McNinch, Director of Program and Events, helping select the venue and publicize the event. Doug Paletta here, Associate Director of PPE, who organized the event, and Sarah Gish-Kraus for working through, difficult logistics. Now, when we think about whom shall we invite to the Goldstone Forum, there are a few things we are looking for. So it's not a random choice. First, we need someone who's more than well established in their field. And Professor McCloskey is a distinguished professor of economics, history, English, and communication at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She had a very prolific career, having written 17 books, and the newest is Why Liberalism Works. I think is the right title, because she told me they keep changing titles, okay? How Through Liberal Values Produce a Freer, More Equal, Prosperous World for All is coming out this fall. And she's published around 400 articles, so it's a vast publication. Second, PPE, being who we are, being PPE, we're interdisciplinary, so we're looking for somebody who's also interdisciplinary. And anyone familiar with Professor McCloskey sees that and knows that. She's very interdisciplinary. To borrow a few of her book titles, she's written or co-authored How to Be Human, Though an Economist. The Cult of Statistical Significance, How the Standard Error Cost Us Job, Justice, and Lives. The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics in an Age of Capitalism, and Bourgeois Equality, How Ideas, Not Capital or Institution, Enrich the World, just to name a few. And there are some of her books are outside if you want to buy them. I had, speaking of interdisciplinary, I met Professor McCloskey many, many years ago in the mid-'80s when she organized a big conference on the rhetorics of economics, which was a topic nobody was even thinking about then, so very, very interdisciplinary. And for the first time, I saw philosophers and economists together. And, in conversation, in useful and interesting conversation. And I'm still embarrassed because at dinner she asked me to recite Dante, the Divine Comedy. And, fortunately I remember a few lines. So I did, in Italian, of course. And so it's still embarrassing remembering it. Now, finally, I want to alert you that you're looking at someone who has a unique voice. And to hear her unique voice, I'm getting out of the way. I think we're in for a treat. Now, I want to alert you, after the talk, there will be some time for questions from the audience, and you are all invited to a reception following the forum in the lobby outside. Please join me in welcoming Deirdre McCloskey.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a somewhat strange voice. I've stuttered all my life. And as I get older, I get more fluent, which is good because I'm in an occupation where I have to talk all the time. So you'll have to adjust to my low voice and my stuttering and all kinds of things. It's still a free country, I think. Donald Trump to the contrary. And you can run out if you can't stand it anymore. We're to talk about an important question. What politics should we have? Now, as you mentioned, I have a book from Yale coming out this November called Why Liberalism Works. But my liberalism, as I declare in the first sentence, is probably not what some of you who came this afternoon expected it to be. So I don't want to, you can also leave if this offends you. Because my liberalism is not the word as it's used in the United States, where it means a large role for the government. In my opinion, much too large a role. Nor as it's used in Latin America, where the word liberal means conservative. On the contrary, a contrario, I want the word to mean, and I'm like Humpty Dumpty, I get to define the words as I want to. It's a question, as Humpty Dumpty said, who's to be master? I define it the way the rest of the world defines it, in the way of Adam Smith, the blessed Adam Smith, who spoke of the liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice, by which he meant, if you examine the text, equality of social standing. Adam Smith was an egalitarian, as his contemporary, so to speak, at the very end of his life at least. Robert Burns said, "A man's a man for a' that. You see an birkie cara laird, with struts and stairs and all that. Though hundreds worship at his word, he's but a coof for a' that." A man's a man for all that was very much what Smith believed, even in the highly hierarchical society of 18th century Scotland. And his liberty, equality, liberty, and justice, is the freedom to open a hairdressing salon in the neighborhood when you feel like it, something I desperately need, or to move to another part of Britain to work. He was particularly outraged by the restrictions on the mobility of labor in England, not in Scotland, but in England, called the laws of settlement. He was outraged that a poor working man couldn't use his skills in a harmless or indeed helpful way by moving to where there was a job, where someone was prepared to pay him. And then justice, of course, meant equal justice under law. Now, none of these has been achieved anywhere perfectly. But we struggle with it if we're liberals. On the first one, the equality, a man's a man for all that. I've lived for some time in Australia, which is a much more egalitarian country than ours. There's a fierceness about men when they go in a taxi. The men always sit in the front seat with the driver because that's egalitarian. He's your mate, whether you know him or not. But I've also lived in Britain. First time was when I was young, very young, 16. And I learned about the English class system. And when I explain it to my students, what the class system is, my American students, they don't know what class is. no idea. They say, oh, well, is it about income? I mean, rich people are upper class and poor people are lower. Oh, no. I said, I explained it to them by saying it's like race in our country. It's like race. It's inherited. It's a signal that you bear your whole life. So all three of those countries, the United States and Australia and Britain, are liberal in their basic polity, in their basic attitude towards each other, socially and politically. But they vary a great deal. I mean, after all, our own country struggles to this day with race. And so, and especially as an economist, as I was trained to be, the second term in Adam Smith's liberalism, namely economic liberty, is much hindered, much modified, much footnoted in a modern economy. In the United States in 1950, 5% of occupations required a government license. Lawyers, doctors, a few others. Now it's 30%. Interior decorators they need to go to university or some sort of school, and then they get the state's stamp of approval, and then they can arrange your furniture. Hair braiders, this is a famous one. Braiding of hair, particularly important in the African American community, it too is licensed. In Italy, where this stuff has gone even further, a couple of years ago it was proposed to have government licenses for those men in whose hands the nation literally resides, the pizza cooks. This has become nutty. Licenses for everything. On the claim of safety, as though, well, you can see that you can make a very good argument against such licenses. I think it's true that social and geographical mobility, especially social, has gone down rather in the United States in the last 30 or 40 years. And that's again partly, I think, because of mistaken interventions by the state, by the government in our affairs that Adam Smith would not approve of. Now, neither Adam Smith nor I, in Russia, I have to do it the other way. Neither Adam Smith nor I are anarchists. He and I both think that there is a role for the government. I think there is. Some kinds of enforcements of laws, although understand that in all societies, most laws are enforced not by the government. They're enforced by norms of the sort that Christina is a world-renowned expert in, or they're enforced by local police with quotation marks around them in a gated community, for example, or in the dorms, the undergraduate dorms, by the graduate student assistant, or whatever. Yet, I don't deny that there's a role for the state in enforcing equal justice under law. Though I note that states, governments, have made rather a specialty in not having equal justice under law. I remind you that official government-sponsored Apartheid was the policy of many, many states in the United States, and extended even to the city of brotherly love in some ways. So we haven't achieved a perfect liberal society, but I say that's its definition. To put it another way, I think the simplest and best definition of liberalism is the historically accurate one: a society of, I always stutter in foreign languages, a society of liberty, that is, free people, not slaves in Latin. That's how the word was defined in Latin: being a non-slave, not having a master, not having someone, now hear this is quite important, who can physically coerce you. It's one thing to agree voluntarily to be ordered about in a factory. Henry Ford raised the daily pay to $5 in his assembly lines because he was having a terrible problem with absenteeism and people quitting and having to be retrained. So he just burst through the average compensation for a unskilled or semi-skilled person and paid them, okay, I'll pay you $5 a day as long as you agree to work in these terrible conditions of early assembly lines. Assembly lines, by the way, I've been to the Gothenburg factory of Volvo. You should see the assembly line there. They're making Volvos, and nothing much is happening. There are these enormous automatic welding machines that are going like this. They're like some prehistoric monster, click, 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 24 hours a day. And the workers are mainly standing around in white coats, examining dials and turning them from time to time. But the early assembly lines in automobile factories, which made it possible to build cars for poor people or middle-class people, were terrible places to work. But if you were paid, though Henry Ford was the boss, he couldn't coerce you because you could walk away, and did. Indeed, sharecroppers in the South, around the time of the so-called Great Migration north from Mississippi or Alabama or Georgia to Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, they were walking away from not enslavement, but away from a so-called debt peonage, to the debt peonage to the country store, to the landowners, sharecroppers, but they could walk and did, by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions. They walked away. In the United States, as you know, if you can't pay your mortgage, you can walk away. In most countries, you can't. Most countries, as in Britain, the debt follows you. So if you make a mortgage deal and the price of your house goes down, too bad for you, you've got to pay it. But not in our country. So there's an imperfect liberalism, but its core is freedom from physical coercion. Now, I want to stress this because there's a pronounced tendency to extend the meaning of the word violence or coercion to speech. And I want to assert on an Ivy League campus that free speech even obnoxious speech, even offensive speech is allowed. We're to argue against it. If we don't like people being called queer, I was once a guy until 1995. I was a man. Okay, people can call me queer. Feel free. We're queer and we're here. Get used to it. Is our response too bad for you? And in a free society of non-slaves, that works. We can't be physically coerced. So it's the physical coercion that's the key line between a liberal society and a non-liberal society. Now, I'm a historian as well as an economist, an economic historian, in fact, and I tell you, in case you have forgotten or didn't know, in the 18th century, everyone was being physically coerced. If you were an apprentice, like Benjamin Franklin was apprenticed to his father in being a chandler, and then to his brother in printing, he was an apprentice. Ben Franklin, before he escaped to Philadelphia, was indentured to a 7-year contract to obey his brother. And if he didn't, it was commonplace in the 18th century to hit him. He was a teenager, so I imagine that was especially tempting. And he was a smart aleck too, so, all teenagers are smart alecks, but he was smarter than most teenagers. But he escaped to Philadelphia. If the law of Massachusetts could reach that far, if the coercive powers of the Massachusetts state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, were strong enough, it could reach across down the coast and take him back. In England, in the 17th, 18th century and before, servants in husbandry were not slaves. They were not indentured servants for a term of years, but they were annual servants. There would be a hiring fair, ordinarily in the fall, after the crop was in. And then you could make a new deal if you were not satisfied with the farmer who had hired you the year before. But once you were hired, if you'd said, oh boy, this Jones character, he's terrible, I'm out of here, as you can in the United States, there's not in legal terms specific enforcement of labor contracts in this country. If you want to leave the NBA, you can this afternoon. If you violated that annual contract, he would send the sheriff and pull you back, and you would be beaten. Husbands routinely beat their husbands. I was a folkie in the 1960s, I'm that old, and I used to sing all the folk songs. I was a socialist at the time. I was a Joan Baez socialist, I say. And Pete Seeger was my model, and Woody Guthrie, I know all the songs. Thousands of folks back east, they say, hitting the hot old dusty way. There was a song, I also did Scottish and Irish songs. There's a song called The Cooper of Fife. There was a wee cooper who lived in Fife in Scotland. And he had, now hear the phrase, a gentle wife. The word meant a gentle, womanly wife. And she wouldn't bake and she wouldn't spin. She wouldn't make bread and she wouldn't make yarn. And the outcome of the story is he was a cooper. For some reason, I don't quite know why this fits into being a cooper, which is a person who makes barrels. But he took a sheepskin and put it over her and beat the sheepskin because it would shame her gentle, that is high status, position to beat her directly. And then he got her to do what he wanted her to do. And after singing this for years with great enthusiasm, I finally realized that it's a story about wife beating. And I said, wait a second, Deirdre, stop singing that song. Sailors were beaten. Soldiers were beaten. They stopped. They stopped flogging in the Royal Navy as late as the 1860s. They used to say that the Royal Navy ran on rum, buggery, and the lash. Rum, buggery, and the lash. These were brutal times before liberalism. And the burden of liberalism is that this sort of thing has to stop. Now, you can take the view, and I once did, so I understand its attractions, that there's such a thing as wage slavery. That's a common term. In the shorter Oxford English Dictionary, which is the kind of college version of the Oxford English Dictionary, there's a entry which you're invited to go look up about wage slavery, and it says anyone who's employed is a wage slave. And this is a contradiction in terms. A wage is a voluntary agreement. It may be a nasty job. It may be not pleasant, breaking rocks. But it's better than being what's worse than breaking rocks? Let's do it the other way. You may be a messenger boy, say. And that's terrible. It's a terrible job in a poor country. Just awful. But if the alternative is breaking rocks, you're free to go back to the rock-breaking trade if that's what you want. So it's voluntary, even if nasty. So we've got to stop talking about wage slavery. We've got to stop thinking of what I would prefer to call not capitalism, which is an extremely stupid word, but innovism, to have a short summary of it, innovism. Commercially tested betterment is the longer phrase. That's what we normally call capitalism. And it's ridiculous, I think, to think of capitalism as the enslaving force. Now, I told you I was once a Marxist, and I believe this. I was not a very scholarly Marxist, I have to admit that, when I was 18. Few people at 18 are. I had read, maybe 3/4 of the Communist Manifesto, and I figured I had it. Because all you needed to learn was the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. That's it. So after I started to not believe that and moved over to economics, I was delighted to find that marginal cost equals marginal benefit is just as simple. It's a wonderful, wonderful simplicity. But there's no wage slavery. Let me take a case in point. I'm a feminist. Even as Donald, I was a feminist, and my friends in feminist economics were very kind of irritated when I became a woman, because then there was another woman who was a feminist. Big deal. Once they had a reasonably well-known male economist who was a feminist, but that irritates them. But I'm a feminist. And I've argued about this with Deirdre Spivak, who's a very well-known scholar of these matters about imperialism and so forth. And I've argued with her and a number of other people saying, no, capitalism is a source of liberation for women. It's not a source of enslavement. Enslavement is a source of enslavement. There's an easy one. Husbands who can beat you is a form of enslavement. If, as a New England mill girl, you can go from being dominated by your father to go work in a mill and make your own money for a while, then getting a husband, you have obviously much more power in the family than you had before. Power isn't quite the word I want to use. Influence, at least. Standing. So, I believe that market women in poor countries are a great source of autonomy for women. The word autonomy, which figures very heavily in Kant, Immanuel Kant, is an important word here. It means in Greek self-rule. That's all it means. Nomos, you would say. And the self-rule that comes with, which is true liberation, is what I advocate. Now, there is this book, which I'm sure you will order now at Yale and get multiple copies. Makes a wonderful Christmas present. Published in November, just in time. Your mother will be delighted to get a copy. If you can't wait, there are 3 other books you should read of mine. Actually, all 19 books, not 17. It's 19 books. Always at my back I hear Time's chariot hurrying near. I'm old, so I got to finish all these books in a hurry. But there's a trilogy that, so to speak, comes to this conclusion about the economy especially, and the polity, but especially the economy, whereas the book from Yale is about politics. These 3 books, called The Bushwha Era, from the University of Chicago Press, came out in 2006, 2010, and 2016. And the first one, by the way, I gave a talk on these 3 books at Syracuse a couple of days ago, and I put the 3rd volume, which is very thick because I had to cram everything into it, on the blackboard as an, show and tell, and forgot to pick it up, and someone stole it. But I think that's socially better off. I have piles of these books. Some poor graduate student now has a book to read of an evening. The first one was called The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce. And it's a virtue ethical approach, not Kantian, not contractarian, not utilitarian, to the virtues in a bourgeois society. After all, one of the great steam power behind socialism is contempt for the bourgeoisie, for the middle class, for the banker, for the merchant, for the middleman. A sophisticated 12-year-old girl whose father's works on Wall Street in New York. Her father says, no, you can't go on that sleepover tonight, right? She's 12, he doesn't want her to. And she says, oh, Daddy, you're so bourgeois. And that's really how we think of the middle class. Everyone here is middle class, but we think of, in this contemptuous way, of the middle class, of the bourgeoisie. So that's what I was on about in that book, trying to show that the traditional 7 virtues of Christian Europe, which you can find parallels for in Islam and in China and in South Asia, have commercial versions, that we can be courageous in an enterprising way in business, that we can be loving in business and in our families in a bourgeois society. And then it occurred to me that I may have stumbled on an explanation for how we got here. So the next 2 books, these are marvelous books which you must run to Amazon to buy. The next one was called Bourgeois Dignity: Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World. Now, I'm an economist right down to my fingertips, but I don't believe that simple-minded bourgeois economics is a very good guide to how we got rich. Investment on the right of the political spectrum, exploitation or imperialism on the left, neither of them explain the modern world. What explains it, I show in the 3rd volume. You have to imagine a big thick thing called, let's see, what's it called? Bourgeois Equality: How Ideas, not capital or institutions, enrich the world. In that book, I show that the reason we got rich was an ethical, ideological norm change, for which I gather the evidence in northwestern Europe, starting in Holland in the 16th and 17th century, spreading then around 1700 to Britain, and then to Scotland, and then to the American colonies. And what was this norm change? It wasn't a change in the ethics of people in business. They have their ethics and they have ethical convictions. Anyone here in business knows that you want to be good to your employees if you can, and you don't want to. It's not true that the average business person is teeth, blood pouring from the fangs of the blood of the workers. That's not true. And the argument is, in fact, that it was the attitude of the rest of the society that changed. The ethical attitudes of other people about people in business, about the bourgeoisie. That's what mattered. The contrast here, for example, just to give you a very short instance from a book that has lots of other instances, take Shakespeare. There are no bourgeois heroes in Shakespeare. Even Antonio in The Merchant of Venice is a fool for love, love for Bassanio, as it happens. Whereas Jane Austen, my beloved Jane Austen, her heroes are not bourgeois, most of them. They're not. They're, on the contrary, they're gentry. They're the middle class of the countryside, not the middle class of the town, not the borghese, as the Italians say. But she is charitable and friendly towards actual bourgeois figures. Her brother, one of her brothers, was a banker in London. And she herself was delighted to make money, as gentry women were not supposed to, in selling her novels. So there was a great change, documented in some detail, between, say, 1600 and 1800 in Britain. And the result was the modern world. The result was an explosion of innovation, because people were permitted in this new liberalizing society to have a go. Think of it one by one. In the early Republic in the United States, poor men were gradually enfranchised. They weren't by most of the first constitutions of states in the United States. There was a property qualification for voting. The symbol here is Jackson. When he was elected, the Federalist plan for the notables in the community, the Adamses and the rest, the Madisons, to run things was well and truly dead. The anti-slavery agitation, emancipation eventually, and the agitation against slavery. The first mass political movement after the revolution, with which it had certain similarities. Then the slaves themselves freed. Then, slowly, women freed. Under English common law, a wife was absorbed into the man so far as property was concerned. All her property, except her personal property, her clothing and her jewelry or something, became the man's as soon as she was married. That gradually ended. In England, it was in the early 1870s, the Married Women's Property Act. So there was a gradual freeing of people, freeing of it's always a case of two steps forward, one step back. It was a jagged progress, but it kept happening. Eventually, women, starting in the 1960s, became thoroughly emancipated. As you may know, the grandmothers of most of the people in this room, or the great-grandmothers, couldn't open a bank account on their own. They had to have their husband's signature. And then gays were liberated. And colonial people were. And transgendered people. And this and that. And more people were brought out of the condition of masterhood, having masters, and into a position of being free. And my claim is that that made us not just free as we all want to be. Well, do we? Or are we comfortable in being slaves? That's, I think, a deep psychological issue here. Do we really want to be free, or would we rather that the mother and father state take care of us? I want to persuade my fellow Americans and my Italian friends and whatever to be free. But in any case, freedom has been, this gradual expansion of freedom has been the theme of the modern world. And I claim that it's the source of economic growth. And it's the source of course, I mean, directly, of increased human dignity. When you're a slave, when you have a servant, when you have a husband who feels free to knock you around, you are not a free person. That we're free makes us willing to take chances, risks in projects, economic, artistic, scientific, start a rock band in your garage, that sort of thing, becomes routine. And out of it comes non-routine inventions. In 1956, Malcolm McLean, a boy so poor he hadn't been able to go to college, who ran a trucking firm in North Carolina, got the idea of the container, the box. He said, let's take cheap steel, which we have invented 100 years before, and let's put it in a kind of corrugated way so that you can pile, so it's strong. That's the principle of the I-beam. Make it strong on its sides so you can pile a bunch of them on top of each other, put them on a ship and send them to China. This is one of the most important innovations in the modern world. It radically cheapened goods worldwide. The modern university, of which this institution we're in now, although I hesitate to use the word institution, Mae West, the great comedian of the 1930s and 40s, she wrote all her own stuff and she said, I believe in the institution of marriage, but I'm not ready for an institution. But the institution of the research university was an invention, 1810, by von Humboldt in the University of Berlin. Previously, we had universities, Bologna, Oxford, but they were not primarily devoted to the advancement of science, of knowledge, Scienza, not just physical and biological science. And after 1810, more and more universities were. So these innovations, these discoveries, came from ordinary people who became extraordinary because they were permitted to be, as I hope everyone here is. That's what made us rich. It wasn't investment, as my colleagues in economics since Adam Smith have said. That's not it. Investment is necessary, right? You got to have pile, stone on stone, BA on BA, to engineer on engineer, to have a productive economy. But that doesn't make it an innovative economy. That makes it an economy, if all that's happening is accumulation, all that you get is diminishing returns to investment. If we take this hall and make another one right next door, and another one, another one, the fourth one we make doesn't earn as much as this one does. You see? So this characteristically economic argument that K, we call it K because we're so cool in economics, K, capital, delta K we call it, investment, is not the heart of the modern world. As a historian, I can also point out that investment and K was important in every economy, from ancient Egypt to medieval China to 19th century Russia, yet didn't result in what I call the great enrichment. Nor, to take the argument on the left, is exploitation the source of our enrichment, in both senses of enrichment, both physical and spiritual. Exploitation, imperialism, for example, is not why we're rich. Stealing from Native Americans or enslaving Africans was not what made the United States rich. What made the United States rich was invention. Institutional inventions, as I've mentioned, and physical inventions. Now, I want to allow some time for Q&A here. But I want to leave you with a fact. And it's a fact that you really need to feel on your pulse. As John Dewey said, you've got to feel this on your pulse, and it'll change your politics if you do. Unless you have my politics, in which case it'll confirm you. Here's the fact. How much, let's say, in Italy, or the United States, or Japan, or Finland, has income per head in real terms increased 1800 to now? Let's see. How much has it increased? Well, by actual survey, the great Hans Rosling, who died last year, alas, a Swedish professor of public health, he would ask his very many audiences what they thought. And they would say, oh, it's increased, it's doubled since 1800. Increase of 100% if you go back to your fourth grade math. 100%. Or maybe tripled. Maybe it's tripled. 200% increase. A factor of 3 since 1800. The utterly clear, established, rough fact that economic historians have discovered is that the increase in these countries, and it's available to any country which is prepared to go the route of liberalism, as China in its economy, if not at all in its polity, and India in both have done, it's a factor of 30. 30, call it 3,000%. I gave a talk on that number to the great Department of Cultural Anthropology at Cambridge last year, Cambridge University, in the fall. And anthropologists are not famous for their quantitative sense, but a famous anthropologist whom I admire very much stood up after my talk and said, well, you know, I agree with your factor of 30. I can feel that, having been to poor societies. I think you're right, 30 is right. But this 3,000% is too big. I tell you, I admire him, and I'm not going to make him look like a fool in public. So I just hastily moved on to another point. But anyway, 3,000%. And if you correctly allow for improved quality of goods, it's continuing to increase even in places like the United States, which are already rich. It's false. You'll hear it every day on the news, that real wages have stagnated for the last 30 years. No, that's not correct. So you see, if you believe as I do, and I try to show it, I'm not just saying I believe it. I'm not like Donald Trump and saying, oh, I doubt it. You know, this is science. This is scientific work I'm claiming. I believe there's this connection, this intimate connection between liberty and innovation. And I think you can show it in detail. And that is the only way of explaining this gigantic increase. Because none of the economists, or whether they're bourgeois economists or Marxists, can explain the magnitude with their proposals. So I leave you with the thought that contrary to what we say on the left and right all the time. Well, let's put it like this. On the left, they say innovism immiserizes the poor. On the right, they say innovism corrupts the poor. They fall away from the Catholic Church or something. Neither of these is correct. Innovism has made us very rich and pretty good, and will continue to do worldwide. I bring a message of optimism. If we don't fall prey to populism or fascism or central planning socialism, if we adopt what I call Liberalism 2.0, in my own case, I'm an Episcopalian, frozen chosen and all that. I believe in Christian libertarianism or liberalism. I believe we have an obligation towards the poor, and our main obligation is not to continue to impoverish them by freezing them into their status as poor. So go forth and sin no more. Become liberals, all of you. Thank you very much. So I'll sit here. Have we got an extra microphone? Oh, we do? Good, good, good. So if you could go give the microphone to people, don't give it only to guys.
Okay. I'll try. Ladies.
All right. So have at me. Or actually what I'd prefer is that you don't criticize me, but say, oh, Deirdre, what a wonderful talk. I love everything you do. That would be really good if anyone wants to say that. Go ahead. Maybe it'll help to identify yourself, especially if you're an academic, what field you're coming from, or if you're in business or whatever.
Okay. I'm Roman Pettick, and I'm an attorney.
Yeah.
I work for the university. I don't teach here.
Yeah.
And
You teach the administration.
Sometimes they teach me.
Yeah, I bet you do.
But I appreciate your point about the importance of liberty and the freedom to innovate, but it seems to me that you undervalue the importance of having an institutional infrastructure that allows people to function securely and to have confidence that their innovations will be protected, that they will have access to the capital to develop those inventions, that they will have rule of law that will protect that invention from rapacious others who would exploit it in other ways. And I think your point proves too much, because I think you're undervaluing other important qualities of a society that are really essential to the kind of growth and prosperity that we all strive for.
No, wait. I agree with Hobbes, as you do, that without some sort of rule of law, the life of man is not so much solitary, but solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So we're on the same wavelengths. But as you said,
we don't need a license to braid hair.
We don't need license to braid hair. We don't need industrial policy. We don't need tariffs on steel introduced by the Secretary of Commerce, who was a flack for the steel industry for many years. We don't need a great deal of the intervention that as an attorney for the university, you are well aware of the proliferation of of federal laws affecting universities. And I wish they didn't. But observe, I didn't say that capital accumulation or the rule of law was not necessary. It is necessary. But my point is very much is based on the historical one, the historical pattern. Think of a mechanical watch. The gears are those very necessary things like the ability to exploit a patent for a moderate number of years. You might agree with me that it's gotten out of hand. Or the protection from predation. But you might agree with me that a good deal of the predation is by the government itself. But still, I agree. Those are the gears. There are other gears. In fact, so to speak, this is kind of this is like Borges, the great Argentinian. There are an infinite number of gears because there are an infinite number of necessary conditions. The arrow of time, the existence of oxygen in the atmosphere, the existence of a labor force. But what was the spring that made for the great enrichment of 3,000%? And the spring, I say, was the coming of liberalism. So I've written rather in fact, I have a book under consideration at the University of Chicago Press, which deals with this directly, criticizing my friends in so-called neo-institutional economics, who say that institutions in the World Bank, it used to be, the doctrine used to be, add capital and stir, right? Put capital into Ghana, give it lots of foreign aid, stir, and Ghana will become rich. Now, the formula is add institutions and stir. And that doesn't work if you don't have the change in norms that happened in England in the 18th century. So it's, I understand your point, and I've got, I hate to be sort of quantitative about it, but I've got 100 pages on it. It hasn't, put it this way, your point has not escaped my attention.
Thanks. And here we have our next question.
I could give there's a wonderful kind of academic joke you could make. You can say, well, 15 years ago, I was thinking along the same lines.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dina. I'm a student here at Penn.
I can't see you. Can you stand up?
I'm a student here at Penn studying philosophy. I guess I was wondering, given that innovism has worked in the past, but now we see the negative environmental effects of modern technology on our society, what do you think should be done about that?
About modern technology?
About the negative environmental effects and the role of climate change that is now an existential threat to, I would say, all of...
I don't think it's an existential threat, but we can argue sort of separately about that. But I think, as you might expect, that it can be taken care of. And I do believe, let me declare that I believe it's caused by humans and it's caused by carbon. And yep, we got to do something about that. So I take it you and I are on the same page for that. Then the question is what to do. There's a Danish engineer named Lundborg, it's the same name as a great pitcher a long time ago for the Boston Red Sox, but set that aside too. And he says, and I think it's very sensible, he says, yep, I accept that this is caused by humans, now what to do about it? And as an economist, I'm inclined towards market solutions, by which I do not mean you can just let the market go and not have any rule of law or anything. I think the model here should be what we did with the hole in the ozone layer, especially over Antarctica. That was caused, as you know, by air conditioning fluid, but also by hairspray. And it was very interesting to find that Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister at the time, and a big user of hairspray, was one of the leaders, though a liberal in some senses. She was actually a conservative, but she had some liberal free market tendencies. She wanted it to be regulated, and it came to be, and now the hole is closing. So I think that's how to approach it. Now, as for let me just make one more comment about the existentiality of it all. I don't think that's right. Here's what's happening in the world now, and it's been happening for the last, 30 or 40 years. Income per head, real income per head in the world, is increasing at about 2% per year. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but let's call it 2 short generations, it doubles income. In 2 long generations, it increases income by a factor of 4, which solves a lot of problems and is solving them right now. So what's going to happen in the next century is that income per head in the world is going to increase by about a factor of 5, if 2% is what you're talking about. 5, anyway, a large amount. If global warming isn't handled to some degree, there'll be a reduction in that. But it doesn't go to 0. There's a percentage reduction, say 20%. So instead of having 500 on a base of 100, you have 400. But you still have 400. That's my point. So, furthermore, if we allow economic growth to happen, I don't mean carelessly and let any factory pour smoke on my neighborhood, but if we allow economic growth to happen, the number of engineers and entrepreneurs will increase enormously. And I'm optimistic, because it's happened repeatedly, that will tend to solve the problem. These scarcities, these externalities of various kinds have happened before, and they've eventually been solved. When I was a kid in Boston, you'd come home from nursery school or something, run your finger along the sill, which my mother was a very good housekeeper, had dusted in the morning, and your finger would come up black, because we were using soft coal to heat Boston.
Here's the next.
My answers are too long. I'll shorten them from now on.
Very good.
But you must understand that short answers are not contempt for you. They're just that I have written a great deal on this stuff, and I often have an answer, whether it's correct or not. Let's meet together and decide as colleagues over a long period of time. But I've thought of most of this stuff.
Hi. I'm back here. My name is Famida Hendy. I'm from the School of Social Policy and Practice, and I teach there. I had the pleasure of listening to you many, many years ago in Toronto, and really enjoyed your talk today again. I have a question for you, especially since you bring a historical perspective, which I enjoy a lot. What do you think about the migration flows that are happening globally and the freedom of people to move from one country to the other?
Well,
thank you.
Well, I have somewhat radical opinions on this. They weren't radical in 1880, except for the notorious Oriental Exclusion Act, anyone could come to the United States, or Brazil, or Argentina for that matter, and did. And it worked out pretty well. So just as Adam Smith was indignant at the restrictions on the mobility of workers in England, and I'm indignant about Premier Xi's astounding plans in China to further restrict the mobility of Chinese. They already are restricted, yet nonetheless, the largest migration in human history has just taken place in China over the last 30 years. 200 million people have moved from the interior of China to the great cities of the East Coast. I'm in favor of free migration in the same way that as an economist I'm in favor of free trade. If you're in favor of free trade, there's a mathematical and logical point you can make that you should also be in favor of free migration. I say to my European friends, Swedes and Italians, who often have right now much higher percentages of foreign-born than the United States ever had, I say to them, don't worry, it worked out well in the United States and Argentina and so forth, it'll work out in Sweden and Italy. And they say, you're nuts, go away.
We have the next question.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm an undergraduate at Penn. My question was that you position liberalism as an ideology, at least in part, of liberty.
Yes, entirely of liberty,
Entirely of
not
liberty.
in part.
Okay. My idea is that this seems to be a thicker notion of liberty than it seems at first face.
Yeah.
Especially because you draw on the analogy of a master-slave relationship and use
Yes,
that
I
as the
do.
opposite of liberty.
Right.
Well, Philip Pettit also draws on that analogy to argue for what he thinks is the return to a Republican tradition of freedom as non-domination.
Yeah.
Which you also said that the capitalists don't have blood coming out of their teeth.
Right.
Well, what he would argue is that what matters is not that the capitalists actually interfere, but rather is that they have the capacity to do so. Now,
They're
all
what
of
again?
this,
I didn't quite hear it.
not that they actually, what constitutes unfreedom is not actual interference, but rather the capacity to interfere.
Yeah, I think that's nonsense.
Okay,
But
so
I don't care for this at all. It's a crazy idea. I have the potential.
All of this is to say, how do you convince someone to accept your notion of liberty as opposed to someone else's? Given
Well,
that it's not as
if
uncontroversial
it's
as it seems?
potential, I mean, I'm an American. This is what I always say in Europe, and they don't. Sometimes they don't quite get that I'm joking. I'll say I'm an American, and sono americana, and I carry in my purse, of course, a pistol, which I got through inspection because it's made out of ceramic. So, but it's a one shot, but it'll kill you if you disagree with me. And some people in the audience think, "Oh Jesus, these Americans are nuts." So that's a potential. So what's this potential stuff? I could potentially take out my gun and say, "You must agree with my definition of liberty." And you say, oh, yeah. So I don't think you can do this counterfactual stuff very, very easily. I think, and you can't get any evidence of it either. I mean, it's not surprising that it's a philosopher who talks this way, because he can't be too empirically oriented. I had tea with him once, but it was unproductive.
I think we have the next question back here.
Yes.
Hi, thanks. My name is Molly Candon. I'm an economist. So first, I have to thank you for economical writing. It's probably your shortest book, but
It's coming out in the 3rd edition.
every non-economist should read it. If you're writing a dissertation,
Hear, hear.
it's required reading. So I am on faculty in psychiatry and also healthcare management, and this question is in regards to teaching health economics at the undergrad level. Which rights are self-evident, which ones aren't, and how can we tell the difference?
Say it again because I didn't quite get it.
Which rights are self-evident?
What ranks?
Rights.
Are self-evident.
Which one? So healthcare is the
Yeah.
one I'm thinking. Which ones aren't, and how can we tell the difference?
Well, I am hesitant to, well, I don't know. Look, I think the right to good health is not a coherent right. What? Let's express it I can make my argument easier by simplifying it and saying equal health is not a coherent goal of any society. Because then people who are naturally healthy, what? We should pound nails into their heads until they're as unhealthy as the rest of us? So I don't think that our right to health care is sensible. I think rights should be about politics. They should be about voting. They should be about rights to make voluntary deals. Now, let's get concrete. Let's get serious about American health care. Why is American health care twice as expensive as Italian or French or British health care? The share of national income that goes to health care is 2 times what it is in Britain. Well, you say, it's the National Health Service, that's what does it. No, it's another problem which we can't solve by enunciating a right to health and then giving it by taxing other people. Now look, I speak as an old person who has had some health problems, not fortunately, as you can see just by looking at me, not fatal yet. But and you all pay for it. Thank you very much. Anyone here under 65 is paying for me. I'm older than 65, but I'm not going to say how much older. So we can't extend the right unless we want a society which is entirely socialized. There's no stopping point. If we make a right to, I must say that Medicare, which I've been the beneficiary of, I thank you again. My mother thanks you. Everyone thank you. But it's misdirected. What we need to do to bring down the cost of medical care in the United States is something much more radical. We've got to get rid of the crazy monopolies in American medicine. In most countries, to become a doctor, you go to university at 18 and start becoming a doctor. In the United States, no. You must be a summa cum laude graduate from Penn and get an A+ in your organic chemistry course, or you can't get into medical school. This is pazzo. This is insane. Number one. Number two, something much in the news, drugs. What is it? What are we doing that no one in this room is an American can import drugs from Canada or Mexico, where they sell for a quarter to a fifth of their price here? And the drug companies say, well, we've got to spend it on research, and actually they spend it on marketing. But come on, this is ridiculous. This is a monopoly run by the government. Why is it that nurses, I was married for 30 years to a nurse. She was the love of my life. Why is it that nurses can't practice in other countries or other states? Why is it that foreign doctors can't work in the United States? When I was a kid in the 50s, our family doctor, who would, by the way, make house calls, was Italian. He had gotten his degree from, I think, Bologna. and he could work in the United States. And it goes on and on. Hospitals. Did you know that if everyone in this room wanted to start a hospital, that's a good idea. Let's start a hospital in Philadelphia, because there aren't enough hospitals. Let's have some more. Do you know that to do that legally, you need to get a certificate of need? What's that all about? The certificate of need is that the other hospitals have to agree to you opening. Now, does that strike you as crazy? Yes, it's crazy. And we're going to go on paying these ridiculous prices, which makes the poor worse off, which makes us all worse off, which wastes massive amounts in expenditure on medical care in the United States. And we're going to continue to get bad medical results, which we in fact do in public health terms. So as you can see, I'm somewhat indignant about all this.
And so we have time for one more question, and then for the rest of the questions, we'll be having a reception outside.
I'll be there. I'll be
afterwards,
glad.
and so-
I'm the answer lady. If you want advice on your advice to the lovelorn or whatever, I can help you out.
Thank you. I'm Andre. I'm a PhD student in economics here, and my question might actually be an artifact of the fact that I work more on models that are really...
Hold it closer to your mouth, dear.
Okay.
Think of rock music.
All right. My cell phone fell down. Okay, so I haven't been reading much philosophy books lately due to the fact that I'm a PhD student here solving models, but I've read your Humane Liberalism Manifesto, and it struck me as important to think that, isn't it simply thinking that humane liberalism is just a way of making Rawlsian principle work? So if we would choose to be in a society, we would choose to be in a society in which the worst outcome would be at least controlled for, right?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
isn't humane liberalism the only way that we can think of making it work after we make that choice? In terms of like in the social contract, once the stage is settled, isn't that the rule of the game that you want to explore there? That was my thought.
Yeah, I'm sort of not too persuaded by the social contractarianism of John Rawls himself and his colleague and friend, I think, at Harvard, Robert Nozick, who opposed him. They're both contractarians, essentially, and I'm not so sure that's such a smart way to go. But I do agree with Rawls that we've got an obligation to the poor. I told you I did. In fact, Christina and I were talking about it before. Here's how I want to put it, and now I put it in the opening pages of this book, which is very much an expansion of that thing you saw. Hillel of Babylon, a great Jewish sage of the 1st century BCE, put the golden rule negatively. He said, "Do not do unto others what you would not want them to do unto you." Another Jewish sage, who you may have heard of the 1st century CE, said, "Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you." The first Hillel version is masculine in a way. It's libertarianism of the sort we commonly hear. Oh, well, the poor, they should be more independent, and I'm not going to help them, to hell with them. I've got mine. And there's a certain sense to it in that it says, "Don't bother me." I saw a nice cartoon the other day which shows the globe, the world, and this man is hovering over it, and he's going to take over the world. And the caption is, "I'm a libertarian, and I'm going to take over the world in order to leave you alone." And that's this Hillel version. But the feminine Jesus version is don't pass by on the other side. Be the goods Samaritan. Be nice. And I think we need both of them. We need the, what did you call it, the ethical norm opposition to a busybody state. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. The third most unbelievable sentence in English, on the one hand. And we need the family-like, yes, I'll help you, of Jesus of Nazareth. And I don't think we have to choose between the two and turn ourselves into slaves in the Jesus program or isolates, hateful isolates in the Hillel program. We need both.
Everyone join me in thanking Professor McCloskey one more time. We look forward to seeing you at the reception.